Good morning, everyone. I'm Giulia Colonna, and I've been working at Outman's lab. And today I'm going to talk about the role of physical exercise in Parkinson's disease, a clinical, radiological, and wearables analysis. So let's start with some background. Parkinson's disease is actually a really common one. It's the second most common neurodegenerative disease in the US, with more than 60,000 new cases per year. And from a pathological point of view, it's characterized by the neurodegeneration of the dopaminergic system, especially in the substantia nigra. The substantia nigra is a region of the brain that, with the basal ganglia, responsible for motor functioning, but also behavior and emotions. The main symptoms of this disease are resting tremor, rigidity, bradykinesia, and postural instability. The actual most effective treatments for these diseases are oral drugs such as levodopa and carbidopa, but all of these drugs tend to lose effects with the progression of the disease. So actually, their control on the motor symptoms is just transient. So there's always a need of new treatment that could help in delay the progression of the disease. And one of these treatments could actually be the physical exercise. As I'm showing you here, there have been a lot of works talking about the role of physical exercise in Parkinson's, and all of these research projects shows how physical exercise has a neuroprotective effect in the disease, and it also really could improve the motor and non-motor symptoms. That's why the purpose of this pilot study that I'm showing you is actually to evaluate the potential neuroprotective effects of high-intensity exercise in humans with Parkinson's disease using multimodal neuroimaging techniques. What does multimodal mean? It means that in this study, we will be using two types of imaging, PET imaging and MRI imaging. Let's start with the MRI. The MRI will be used to actually assess the dopaminergic degeneration by targeting the neuromelanin-containing neurons. Why neuromelanin-containing neurons? For two reasons. The first one is because neuromelanin, thanks to its ferromagnetic properties, it's really easy to measure using MRI. And secondly, because it has been shown that Parkinson's disease especially occurs in the neuromelanin-containing neurons. And here I'm showing you some of the previous scan where you can see how the white zones over there is the high-frequency zone of the neuromelanin-containing neurons, and you can actually see how in Parkinson's patients the intensity is way lower than in healthy controls. That imaging will be used instead to assess the functionality of the dopaminergic system, targeting the dopamine transporter by using this novel radioligand that is the FEPE2I. And I'm showing you also here some previous scan where you can see how the binding potential of this transporter in Parkinson's patients is way lower than in healthy controls. So how have been the study designed? Our study included 11 patients, 6 male and 5 female, and it lasted for 6 months. Every subject at the beginning of the study actually did a clinical evaluation, a motor functioning test, an MRI, and a PET scan. The clinical evaluation was used to assess the stage disease by using the HMY scale, while the motor functioning tests were used to actually assess the motor symptoms using the UPDRS scale. Then every subject was requested to attend at least 3 exercise sessions per week for 6 months with this program that is called Beat Parkinson's Disease Today program. After 6 months, every subject actually did a second visit with a second clinical evaluation, a second motor functioning test, MRI, and PET scan. And the results of this second visit will be compared with the one of the previous one, both in clinical terms, so in improving symptom terms, but also in imaging terms. Now I'm going to focus on this program, that is the Beat Parkinson's Today program, because it's linked to what I've been actually working for these 2 months. So the Beat PD Today program, it's an exercise program really active in Connecticut that actually focus on doing all of that physical activities that have been shown to be more effective in improving Parkinson's disease symptoms, such as boxing and individualized high-intensity training. But how did we be sure that actually every subject is reaching a high-intensity exercise for every session during the 6 months? We actually monitored their heart rate using 2 types of devices, the Fitbit watch and the Polar HRV chest strap. And by using these 2 devices, we ensured that every subject for every session actually reached some targeted parameters such as the 70 or 80% of maximum heart rate and a high intensity heart zones. But how did we actually decided to use 2 devices instead of 1? We decided to use 2 devices instead of 1 because we weren't sure about the actual reliability of the Fitbit watch into monitoring the heart rates. Why? Because the HRV polar chest strap and the Fitbit Charge 4, they detect heart rate in 2 different ways. The HRV polar measures the myocardial electric potential, and it's really close to how an EKG works, while the Fitbit Charge 4 uses a technology that is called photoplethysmography and actually is able to detect the change in volume in blood vessels in the wrist. The HRV pollen have been proven to be really reliable with a correlation with EKG of 0.997, so really close to 1, while the Fitbit Charge 4 has actually been proven to underestimate the value of heart rate of 6 BPM at baseline condition and 16 BPM at higher heart rates. But what's the downside of the HRV polar? The HRV polar comes with a lot of discomfort because, as you can see here, it's basically a chest strap. While the Fitbit Charge 4, being just a watch, is way more comfortable and convenient for the subjects. So the question that I tried to answer during these 2 months was if we actually were to do a bigger study than the pilot one, could we just use the Fitbit? So what I did is a validation study in PD patients with the purpose of actually evaluating the feasibility of the Fitbit Charge 4 in measuring the heart rate compared to the HRV polar chest strap. And this comparison were made both a baseline condition and a high intensity exercise. How did I do that? First of all, to get familiar with the data and with the database, I started by analyzing one of my exercise sessions here in New Haven. And this is the graph that I obtained. As you can see here, the Fitbit, that is the blue line, seems to underestimate the value of the heart rates compared to the red line, that is the HRV. And this actually agrees with what is reported in literature. After analyzing my data, I tried to apply the same algorithm to the actual database from all of the 11 patients during these 6 months. But actually the problem was that these databases were really huge. We're talking about 14 million values from the Fitbit and 3 million values from the HRV. So I couldn't just analyze them manually, but I had to try and write a Python code. That was a great challenge for me, actually, because I've never used Python before. But as my PI taught me in these 2 months, the only way to learn something new is to actually have a problem to solve. And I had one, it was a big one. So I finally managed to actually write a Python code and to obtain 30 per session from each subject for a total of 300 calculated values to compare. The values that I calculated were the baseline average, so the average of the heart rates from the first 5 minutes of each exercise session, and the highest average, so the average of the heart rates from the 20 minutes of highest intensity exercise. Here I'm showing you just some of the random graph from a single exercise session that I picked. Here we're talking about patient 9. And here you can see how the Fitbit actually seems to be overestimating the value of heart rates compared to the HRV. So this is interesting because it's actually an opposite trend compared to what is reported in literature. And we actually have the same results with patient 11. Also here, the Fitbit seems to actually overestimate the value of heart rates. To get an overall idea of the reliability of the Fitbit, I've also tried to do a scatter plotting. Here you can see has our blue line, that is the fit line from all of these blue dots that represent the average values at baseline condition brought from HRV and Fitbit, has a slope that is quite close to 1 actually. And it's quite close to the orange line. The orange line is the ideal line of y equal x. So if it's the 2 devices, would actually have the same reliability into measuring the heart rates. But we have a different situation as we're talking about the high intensity exercise. Because in this case, as you can see, the actually slope of the line is quite far from the orange one. So that means that actually the Fitbit, it seems to lose sensitivity into detecting the heart rate as the values of heart rates become higher. And also, as you can see, the number of blue dots that are up the orange line are bigger than the number of blue spots that are below the orange line. And so this would mean that actually the Fitbit is overestimating the value of heart rates, and this agrees with what we saw in the previous graphs. But actually calculating the linear correlation and regression when it comes to comparing two different types of measurements is not always recommended. So I actually did some research and I've tried to make an alternative analysis. This analysis is called the blind Outman plot, and it's a plot that tries to quantify the difference into two measurements by assessing the mean difference value and the limit of agreements, considered as a plus or minus 2 deviation standard from the baseline. And in this graph, you can see x-axis the average between HRV and Fitbit, and on the y-axis the difference between HRV and Fitbit from every session. As we are subtracting the value of Fitbit from the HRV, we are obtaining a minus 1.83 BPM. This means that the Fitbit is overestimating the value from 1.82 BPM. And in this case, the limits of agreements are around 20 BPM. I did the same in a condition of high intensity exercise, and in this case, it's interesting to see how the mean difference is actually higher. We're talking about minus 6.13 BPM with a limit of agreements of 30 BPM. The last type of analysis that I've done was try to assess the between subject variability. And I did that by calculating the mean difference in measurement for all the subjects, for each one of the subjects. And I also made this graph, and you can see how the variability when it comes to high intensity exercise between subjects is also higher compared to the baseline one. So where are my conclusions? First of all, we can actually say that the Fitbit seems to overestimating the value of heart rates compared to the HRV. And this is quite interesting because, as I said, it's an opposite trend compared to what is reported in literature. Secondly, I concluded that the Fitbit accuracy is actually heart rate dependent, and the Fitbit tends to lose accuracy when it comes to high values of heart rates. And there is a high between subject variability that could be due to many factors, could be due to the patient disease, could be due to physical features, or it could be due to incorrect or correct way in displacing the device. And last, if we actually try to answer the question that I've made at the beginning, so could we use just the Fitbit in the next study? Well, if we decide that we actually can live with a difference of 6.13 BPM, then I would say yes, we can actually just use the Fitbit for the next figure study. Thank you to everyone. I would like to thank firstly the PET Center and all of the lab for actually welcoming me. The Wright lab, especially Victoria and Taylor for helping us, and Tony to actually give us the opportunity to come here, and ONAOSI to build this project. Thank you.
Thank you. You away my Fitbit?
No, you should.
Oh, I can.
No.
Okay, good. So interesting. Questions? Yes.
So if the variability in the Fitbit could have anything to do with the stability monitor in the Fitbit, like that you're shaking it around more?
Actually, the Fitbit it works by actually not considering the tremors. So I think that the variability could be mostly due to the age of the patient and maybe to the characteristic of the vessels of the patients more than just the tremor.
Okay. So exercise. That's really key.
That's my prescription for you.
Thank you. All right. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to get somebody else to prescribe it.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting questions. Yes.
I guess I had one. I think it was most clear in the data set you showed, but there's like this jump in the Fitbit. It almost looks like a non-random error in some cases where it's, you know, you're exercising and then all of a sudden it claims your heart rate goes up where it doesn't really in the other sensor. And so is that maybe in your data that you actually took, I saw it most clearly? Yeah, here, I mean, the Fitbit has this like step at 1044 and then steps back down. Is it like sliding on your wrist, or, I mean, is there some way that the Fitbit could be positioned in a way that it would have less random variations? Because it looks to me like your heart rate really doesn't go up, but it thinks it does.
Yeah, actually, it should be worn 1 centimeter below the wrist, the Fitbit. So it is probably that during exercise, it just light up. But also, the Fitbit is have proven to have this kind of, delays in detecting the heart rates. And maybe for some just algorithm within the Fitbit device, they're actually trying to control the variation in heart rates. So we are still trying to assess that.
I see. Thank you.
Very good. No more questions. Thank you.